Chapter 11, The Slave Girl and the Sister Merchant District, Western Gate. 1708, in front of the large gate that connected the working district and the merchant district, a long row of people could be seen waiting in line to pass through. Amongst this row of people, two teenagers could be seen waiting in line. They both had servant clothes, and each of them had surprisingly good looks. These two people were, of course, Daniel and the slave girl. Only a couple of hours had passed since the end of the auction, and Daniel had been so focused on leaving the merchant district that he didn't have a chance to properly speak to the girl he had just set free. He only stopped once to make sure that the girl didn't have a family to come back to, and to offer her a place to stay. After that interaction had ended, and the girl had shyly accepted Daniel's offer, the system's message finally appeared. Astra's freedom for all. First objective complete. Reward: 75 karma points. The girl wasn't really expecting Daniel to honor his promise, and when he saw him in the crowd, bidding for her, she still had doubts about his motives. All these doubts had been eradicated from her mind the moment he destroyed the slave deed and set her free on the spot. She spent the next couple of hours in silence, following this strange young man as he took her to a bathhouse, as he bought her clothes and offered to her a place to stay. "My name is Daniel, by the way," said Daniel randomly while waiting in line. "Yours?" He then continued. "Maya," she answered in a low voice. Daniel was thinking about how to ask his next question. He never had meaningful conversations with anyone but his sister, nor did he know how to deal with difficult subjects. So he decided to ask directly. "You don't look used to being a slave. What happened to you?" he asked her. Maya looked at him and said, "I am not. I was the young mistress of the Rulin house. My full name is Mia Rulin," said the girl with hints of pride and sadness in her voice. Daniel was surprised by the Mia's words. He didn't know who the master of the Rulin house was, nor how important the Rulin were in Kerala's spectrum of families, sects, and schools, but he knew that a house, in order to have a master and a young mistress, had to have some sort of power. He looked at Maya and asked her what happened to your house. How could they allow their young mistress to be taken as a slave? Mia's look turned even sadder before responding. "My father was a powerful martial cultivator of the 7th rank. He was one of the main forces of Kerala's army during the war 8 years ago, but he disappeared without leaving a trace when the war was coming to an end." A clear trace of anger grew in her voice as she continued. "One of my father's old enemies, the master of the school of everlasting fury, didn't waste time to accuse him of deserting for the enemy kingdom," she said while biting her bottom lip. "After the war ended and my father never returned to clear his name, many voices through the kingdom started to circulate, spreading the news that the master of the Rulin house had betrayed the Kerala's kingdom. So many people had been lost in that war, and when the rumor of a traitor had been spread, the people demanded the king to issue an eradication order for my entire family." At this point, tears were forming on the corners of her eyes. The king must have thought that we had no more worth without my father. So he gave in under the pressure and ordered an eradication campaign against my house, she said while brushing the welling up tears from her eyes. "We had been alerted by one of my father's loyal friends that the king had ordered for our extermination. So in the middle of the night, we escaped and have been on the run ever since." Daniel didn't know what to say. He knew nothing about politics, nor did he know what happened within the high echelons of the kingdom. After thinking for a few moments, he asked, "So, what happened to the rest of your family?" But he immediately regretted asking it. The eradication campaign didn't stop only because we had escaped. We had become traitors within the kingdom, so no matter where we went, when we were found out, we would be hunted down and killed. From what I know, I might as well be the only survivors." After Maya finished explaining, she couldn't help remembering all the painful moments she had been through in the last half of her life, and start crying. Daniel had never been one to judge without knowing the facts. He knew of the dark side of people. In fact, he could see it clearly thanks to his karmic system. So even if he felt angry when learning that Mia's father was one of Kerala's main forces during the war, and therefore one of the warriors that had been too late to save his father, he still understood that since the one who accused Mia's father of being a traitor was one of his enemies, that accusation must have been a defamatory one, aimed to turn an enemy into a traitor. Of course, Everyone knew about the bad blood between the Ruland's house master and the master of the school of everlasting fury. Most had guessed that the latter was aiming to get rid of one of his old enemies when he accused the former of treason. So most of the king's council and the king himself had rejected his ideas of treating the Ruland's master and family as traitors. What forced the king to change his mind was the public outrage that, when the rumors of the Ruland's house master had deserted for the enemy kingdom spread like wildfire through his still grieving kingdom, had forced him to cave in. Daniel dropped the topic and waited patiently for their turn to pass through to arrive. Half an hour later, they had reached the commoners section of the working district. On his way back, Daniel had stopped more than once to various shops and marketplaces to buy the essentials for Maya, numerous rank 1B scores, and a cultivation manual for martial and spiritual cultivation. He and Maya walked towards his sister's school and waited for her to come out to go back home together. Daniel had taken that habit in the past couple of years. Whenever he would be close to his sister's school, if her lessons were close to come to an end, he would wait for her to come out before going home together. After half an hour of waiting, young men and women started coming out of the building. Daniel looked around until he noticed a group of 7 teenagers. 4 of them were boys and 3 of them were girls. Amongst this group of people, one girl stood out the most. She had an imp-thin figure that was shown by her tightly fitting clothes. Her complexion was porcelain white, and her cheeks were of a natural rosy color. Her slightly arched eyebrows stood above a pair gentle, wide-set eyes, with pupils of a beautiful brown-green color. Her delicate ears framed a just as delicate button-like nose. Right underneath, a pair of bow-shaped, healthy red lips opened and closed, showing a set of pearly white teeth. Her caramel-colored hair flowed above her chest area in big waves, bordering her face beautifully. She was chatting peacefully with her group of friends, and when she noticed the young man standing at the school's gate, she waved her arm at him. Daniel's smile grew wide as he and Maya approached the group of teenagers. As the girl which had called for his name approached him, Daniel said, gently, "Sister," the smile never leaving his face. She hugged Daniel tightly and said, "Did you eat what I've left you this morning?" "Of course." "It was awful," he said with a smirk on his face. Daniel had a special relationship with his sister. She was older than him, but since he provided for the both of them, they had always felt strange, behaving like the classical older sister and younger brother. The complicity between the two was so deep that they behaved more like partners in crime than siblings. After a few moments, Daniel took the books right out of his sister's hands and put them into his backpack. He then looked at her while indicating towards Maya and said, "Sister, this is Maya. She'll be staying with us for a while." He then looked towards Maya and said, "Maya, she is my sister." Rayla, he then gave a moment for the news to sink into his sister's head. Rayla had complete trust in Daniel's actions. For her brother had good judgment, and whatever he did, he would do it for a good reason. Of course, this had never stopped her from teasing him for his decisions. With this objective in mind, she looked at Maya. "My real name is Ray Heel, but you can call me Rayla. It's a real pleasure to meet you, Maya. I hope you're not in trouble because of my brother. If he tries anything weird, a kick in between his legs is always an available option," she said while smirking. Daniel expected this kind of comment from her, just like every other member of her group of friends, which had become used to the dynamics of this particular pair of siblings. Maya, on the other hand, was extremely surprised. She thought that Daniel had been rude to her, and that Rayla wanted to make him pay for his crude remark, but that wasn't the case. After bidding farewell to her schoolmates, Rayla, Daniel, and Maya started heading back home. In their travel back, Maya and Rayla chatted for a bit. It didn't take long for Rayla to learn about Mi's circumstances. Maya felt grateful to Daniel, so she didn't want her brother to have secrets from his sister. She had decided that she would tell her situation to Rayla, and then let the pair of siblings decide if it was worth helping her. What surprised Maya even more was that whenever she mentioned Daniel's actions, the expression on Rayla's face grew prouder and prouder. At the end of Mi's story, Rayla's trust for Daniel's judgment had only reinforced. She then approached Daniel by the side, hit his arm with her elbow, and kissed the side of his head. Maya expected a heated conversation between the pair of siblings, but again, she was wrong. Daniel had expected his sister's action, as they weren't uncommon. Sister, I will go home and pack her stuff. Would you mind taking Maya with you and go to look for a bigger house in the commoner's district? As he said these words, he kept looking at his sister's expression from the corners of his eyes. He then added somewhere close to your friend's houses, maybe. His sister looked at him with wide eyes. A smile that made people turn around and disbelief grew on Rayla's face. Daniel had promised her more than once that once their debt would be settled and things would have been easier for them, they would move closer to her friends. That had become one of his sister's dreams. Rayla couldn't help but wrap her slender arms around her brother's chest and squeeze him tightly. Daniel felt like his promise to his mother had been partially fulfilled. She was safe, she was happy, and she would have a good life. These were Daniel's most important objectives. After a few seconds, Rayla let go of her brother. Daniel handed a small bag containing 10 gold coins to her and asked her to rent the biggest house she could find. He then bid farewell to the two girls and started walking towards the slums. When reaching his house, before starting to pack their belongings, he took a small pouch which contained the rank 1 beast cores and the books regarding martial and spiritual cultivation. Then he sat on his bed. Sua, mind explaining how do I use my karma points again? Chapter 12, Cultivating It's About Time. I thought you would end up only using me for becoming rich. He answered Sua. Part of Daniel's plan had always been to become stronger. Strength was dependent on money and fury, but in order to make money, unless born into a rich family, one required something to rely on. Originally, Daniel wanted to pay his debt, allow his sister to graduate from school, and then let her find a good job. But after seeing the way the wealthy treated human lives of the lowest level, he realized that he needed more than that. He needed a way to prevent others from stepping over him and his sister, like the hotel owner did with his family. He needed strength. Daniel wasn't harmless anymore. He didn't need to live by the day like he used to. He had the Karmic System now. He could plan. Asterisk primary quest started. You can't do good without strength. Asterisk description. Obtain enough power to protect those in need. First objective set. Cultivate to the peak vasodilation of the martial cultivation or the peak profound spiritual connection of the spiritual cultivation. Optional. Reach perfection before breaking through the next stage. Reward. Karma plus 500 plus 1,000. Time limit. 3 months, 4 months. Surprise grew on Daniel's face as one more window appeared inside his mind, warning him that a new quest had started. Since the moment he had awakened Sua and the Karmic System, Daniel had understood a few things about it. First of all, a primary quest had to start from a train of thought. For example, the freedom for all. Quest had started when had witnessed the treatment Maya had received by the fat merchant, and his desire to set her free had triggered the creation of a quest. Second, a quest has to pertain to karma. In each quest, a decision had to be made that would either grant him positive or negative karma, meaning that he could possibly create any sort of quest, provided that he formulated it within the parameters of karmic influence. The very last quest, for example, wouldn't have been created if Daniel only wished to become strong. But since he decided to become strong in order to protect his sister, he turned his motive into one that would influence his karma, therefore creating the quest. Well, that comes in handy. Hihisua was just about to explain how to utilize karmic points to Daniel when a window appeared. He was, of course, part of the Karmic System, so he was able to see through every change within the system itself, like Daniel could. It's very simple, really. Start cultivating, and whenever you will enter a lengthy process, just think of speeding it up. Your karmic points will slowly decrease until you'll run out. Have you learned nothing from me? Trial and error. Come on, explained Sua. Daniel still didn't know anything about cultivation. That was the reason why he had bought the cultivation manuals. He took them out and started reading through their pages. In Daniel's world, cultivation had 2 main branches. The martial cultivation, which allowed a person to strengthen their bodies through the use of ki, and spiritual cultivation, which had the aim of cultivating one's spirit through the use of mana and increase its connection to the spiritual plane, from which the cultivator could absorb the power required to use magic. The basics of martial and spiritual cultivation explain the first two main stages of cultivation. Each main stage was divided into three sub-stages, commonly referred to as ranks. Each person would be born as a mortal, and their default stages of cultivation were at the muscle strengthening of the martial cultivation and the spirit forming of the spiritual cultivation. These two stages were known as the starting point of every human being, and therefore referred to as unranked. The first two main stages of the martial cultivation were the body strengthening stage and the nigh inhuman stage. The body strengthening stage started with the organs enhancing substage, or rank 1, which enhance your organs' resistance and efficiency. The rank 2, or the bones refining substage, was the stage that would allow the cultivator to increase the density of their bones. The third and last substage of the body strengthening stage was called vasodilation and was the dilation of one's blood vessels, which would increase the flux of blood that would allow the body keep up with the increased strain. After breaking through from the body strengthening stage, one would find himself into the nigh inhuman stage. The nigh inhuman stage was similarly divided into three substages or ranks, starting from the full control substage, or rank 4, which allowed a person to perfect the control of their body. The rank 5, described as the reflex heightening substage, was the stage that allowed a cultivator to increase his reflexes to an inhuman level. Ultimately, the surrounding awareness substage, or rank 6, was the stage that allowed a cultivator to develop a field around their bodies, inside which they would have complete awareness. The book that Daniel had bought only mentioned the third main stage of the martial cultivation as a mortal path stage. Similarly to the basics of the martial cultivation, the basics of spiritual cultivation only explain the depth of the first two stages. They were called the spirit connection and spiritual synchronization stages. The substages of spiritual cultivation were much easier to understand, as the spirit had much less parts to nurture when compared to the body. Therefore, each main stage of the spiritual cultivation substages were used to indicate the progress in the main stage, and were referred to as faint, moderate, and profound. For example, a person in the first rank of the spiritual cultivation would be referred to as a spiritual cultivator at the faint spiritual connection stage. Like in the manual of martial cultivation, the third stage of spiritual cultivation had only been mentioned, and it was called the spirit merging stage. The more Daniel read, the more he understood, but at the end, he started to have some doubts. Why was there no mention to perfection in any of these books? He read the manual's pages over and over again, but the answers he looked for were nowhere to be found. According to the manuals, one could attempt to break through to the next stage right after refining their blood vessels if cultivated the body, or reach the profound spiritual connection if they cultivated the spirit. Daniel had no way of understanding the depths of these stages with the information he was given by these manuals. He had 4 months to reach the peak of the first stage and learn what perfection meant. Setting his thoughts aside, Daniel started reading the methods of cultivation depicted in the manuals. A martial cultivator produced ki through the strain of the body. Ki, similarly to the core essence of a ranked beast, was the essence of the human's body, and it was produced constantly. Breathing, exercising, training, and combat. These were just few of the methods a martial cultivator had to produce ki. The produced ki could then be used to gradually refine the cultivator's body. Just like a martial practitioner used ki to cultivate, a spiritual cultivator used mana to strengthen the spirit. Mana was a natural essence that could be found everywhere in the world. Each and every type of essence, included ki and beast essence, were in fact mana. The very own definition of mana comprised every sort of naturally formed essence which belonged to the earthly plane. A spiritual cultivator could produce ki just like any martial cultivator through the use of breathing and training, and then use the ki to strengthen their spirit. Most people had no means to cultivate, and therefore stayed at the spirit forming or muscle strengthening stages, so they erroneously considered mana as an alternative sort of essence to ki, while instead calling it a generic sort of essence would be much more accurate. At some point in the past, After martial cultivators had found out that every type of essence could nurture the spirit, they started to experiment with the aim of finding out every viable sources of essence, which could be used to increment their cultivation speed. After dozens of years, they had realized that every form of essence produced by a living being could be absorbed by their bodies and turned into ki. This had been the reason that had started the hunt for ranked beasts and many uncountable wars between humans and the other races. Daniel had decided to cultivate the martial path, so he read the martial way of cultivation and adjusted his body into the lotus position. He had also decided to avoid using beast cores, as he wanted to familiarize to the human's natural way of cultivation through self-produced ki. For an hour, he breathed in and out slowly. Whenever he breathed in, his enhanced lungs would expand and send waves after waves of newly produced ki through his muscles, blood vessels, and organs. When his ki had reached every corner body, Daniel forced it to seep through his tissue and reach his bones. Then he began to refine them. His marrow slowly became denser. His cartilage became more elastic. The stratum of cortical bone became harder by the minute. After another hour, Daniel decided to stop. He had read that breakthrough was a lengthy process, and he wanted to know how much of his karma cultivating for 2 straight hours had consumed. Dan Heal, Karmic Systems wielder. Age 14 rank. Peak rank 2 of martial cultivation. Early rank 2 of spiritual cultivation karma. 656. Daniel was extremely surprised that it took him only 2 hours to increase his cultivation from early rank 2 to peak rank 2. Unfortunately, he still had no idea of the rate his karmic system had speeded his cultivation. All he knew was that before he started cultivating, he had 662 karma points, which meant that for basic breathing cultivation, he would require to spend 1 point every 20 minutes. This had left him elated, as this type of cultivation was effortless and required a very small amount of karma points. Of course, he knew that different methods of cultivation would increase the amount of ki produced, which would likely require longer times to be absorbed. When he was about to make an attempt by using a rank 1 beast core, he heard knocking sounds coming from his door. At this point, Daniel realized that he had been cultivating for the past 2 hours and that he still hadn't started to pack things up. He put his beast cores and manuals back into his backpack and went to answer the door. Behind it, a couple of men were standing one in front of the other. The one in front was a short and skinny man, while the one in the back was tall and stout. The skinny man had a small triangular face with a nose so big that it looked out of place. On his head, a lock of thin hair had been glued to his scalp with the intent of hiding his impending baldness. At the base of his neck, a vicious-looking scar that reached from ear to ear could be seen pulsating whenever he breathed in. The tall and burly man was completely bald, his eyes small as a pair of needles, and his neck was so fat that it was indistinguishable where his jaw ended and where his neck started. Daniel knew these 2 men all too well. He had never learned their real names, but he knew that within their organization, they were called Rat and Sweet Cheeks. The skinny man was, of course, Rat. The reason why the big and fat one was called Sweet Cheeks had always been a mystery to him. What was more important than the origin of their nicknames was the fact that these 2 men worked for the hotel owner to whom he owed his debt. Chapter 13, Paying 1-inch Deb Daniel, said Rat with an amicable smile on his face. Daniel had no good impressions about these 2 men. They always came a couple of days before the end of the month to remind them what would happen to him and his sister in case they wouldn't be able to pay in time. Cheeks. Hot. Daniel had met them many times before, and in time, he had found out how acknowledging Sweet Cheeks first would always enrage Rat. Unfortunately, Rat knew just as well where to hit back. "You're always the same arrogant little shit, ain't ya?" said Rat while laughing. He then looked at Daniel attentively and continued, "I can't wait to drag you to the mines and have some fun with your pretty sis." Daniel felt his blood boil when he noticed that, while saying his last remark, Rat had touched himself in between his legs, hinting what he meant by have some fun with your pretty sis. Happy about hitting where it hurt, Rat added, "Remember that the boss owns you, brat. Forget the next payment, and you'll see why don't you take me to your boss then. I already have his money," retorted Daniel right away. Rat's moment had been ruined, and he wasn't in the mood to joke around anymore. So he made a serious face and said, "Petty thief, you are safe for another month then. Give me the money." He then extended his hand towards Daniel. "I think you have misunderstood. I have all your boss money," said Daniel as a faint smile grew on his face. He then took a small bag out of his backpack and let a couple of gold coins slide over his palm, showing them to the couple of goons. Rat slowly retracted his hand while looking seriously at Daniel. To say that the idea of convincing him to give him the money, like any other monthly payment, and then report to his boss that he had only received 10 silver coins as usual didn't cross his mind, would be to lie. Unfortunately, the thought left as fast as it appeared. He knew very well how cunning Daniel was, and even if he felt comfortable with cheating him, he would never do that in front of Sweet Cheeks. One had to know that Sweet Cheeks and him weren't friends. They were partners, and Sweet Cheeks was fiercely loyal to their boss. "All right, let's go to see the boss then," Rat said, still irritated that Daniel had decided to show him the money in front of Sweet Cheeks. Commoner section, 1812. Inside a large hotel was a square lounge room. This lounge room had 3 doors that allowed access inside. Next to one of these doors was a counter, behind which a young, beautiful woman was standing. On the other side of this room, 2 couches had been placed, one facing the other, and in between them was a spotlessly clean coffee table. On one of these couches, Daniel was sitting. Daniel had been facing one of these 3 doors for the past 10 minutes. He had seen this door open only once, and it was when a burly man had come out to chat with a young woman behind the counter. During the few moments in which the door had been opened, before it closed, Daniel noticed that inside the room, on the other side of this door, at least 2 dozens of those-looking men were waiting. What startled Daniel was that each and every one of the men he had laid eyes upon had negative karma, which made him guess that these men were guards, and that they were waiting for something to happen before storming in and defend their employer. While Daniel was worrying about how wise the choice of coming here now had been, the large double door next to the counter suddenly opened. Rat came out of the room, looked at Daniel, and said, "Boss is ready to see you come in." Daniel got up from the couch and walked toward the double door. Behind the double door, a long study room extended for at least 20 meters. A large library covered the entirety of the wall at the far end of the room. Large windows at the right side flushed the entire room with the reddish lights of dusk. Halfway through the room was a coffee table, around which 3 chairs had been placed. On one of these chairs, Sweet Cheeks was sitting. On the far end of the room, right in front of the library, was a large ebony black desk. Behind this desk, a gentle-looking old man was sitting peacefully, sipping tea from a refined-looking cup. This man seemed to be approaching his late 60s, with smoky gray hair and skin wizened with age. Nevertheless, the shine of his watery blue eyes removed from the minds of everyone who saw him the idea that he wasn't the brutal man that he had been in the past. Behind him, a couple of burly men stood quietly. Daniel walked next to Rat until they reached right in front of the desk. Then Rat walked back and sat on one of the chairs near Sweet Cheeks. "So you're Dan. Don't you look just like him," said the old man amiably. Daniel was aware that the old man was acquainted with his father, so it wasn't a surprise for him when he mentioned his name. "I'm here to pay my mother's debt," said Daniel, refusing to follow the old man's topic of conversation. "Rash. It's a family trait, I guess," muttered the old man. "Your mother's debt is 7 gold and 40 silver coins. Do you have all of them?" Daniel threw the small bag of coins on the desk, right in front of the old man. The old man nodded at one of the goons standing behind him, which then started checking the content of the small bag. As his man confirmed that they were coins and started counting them, the old man looked at Daniel and said, "Have you ever heard about the reason why I was acquainted to your father?" The smile on his face still present and as amiable as it ever was. "If you were mentioning it, it must have meant money for you." "My guess is that you'll tell me now," Daniel retorted immediately. "It does. Not just any money, your money." The old man was surprised by the calm attitude Daniel had. Many young men and women, inheritors of their parents' debt, had stood in front of him, but none was as calm as Daniel was. "Unfortunately, your father and I had a less official agreement." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He had expected the old man to try to extort more money from him. That is the reason why, noticing the room full of bodyguards, he had felt slightly worried. What he never expected was for the old man to talk about the dealings he had with his father. Our deal was also of a different nature. The old man took his time. He had learned, after so many years of activity, that one had to make the fish curious before it would take a bite. Meanwhile, the man standing next to the old man had finished counting the coins. He then put the small bag back on the desk and nodded at the old man quietly. The last payment has been made. You and your sister have no more reasons to worry about us, said the old man, dropping the topic of his father abruptly. He then started to slowly sip on his tea once again. Daniel stood in front of the desk for a full minute, and as Rat reached his side and was about to escort him out of the room, he said, "Tell me about the deal you had with my father." The old man put down the cup, looked at him, and then responded, "Then came to me, years back, looking for a slave." "Bullshit," said Daniel furiously. "My father would never buy a slave. I never said he wanted to buy one. He wanted a free one," retorted the old man, while slowly adding a sugar cube to his cup of tea. This time, Daniel kept quiet and allowed the old man to finish. "The slave your father wanted me to find was his younger brother. He had escaped from your family's ancestral home when your family was a little more than a couple of brats playing in the mud. Looking for him was the reason your father moved to Fury to begin with. When he first came to the city, he saw his brother being sold to a mine baron, which he later learned had a business relation with me. After that, he came to me," said the old man, all at once. Daniel had heard from his father that he wasn't a native of Fury, that he had moved here only a couple of years before his sister had been born. What he never learned was why. He got himself killed in war before I could tell him that I had found his brother. Daniel was shocked about this story. He spent years trying to keep his sister and himself free, without knowing that an uncle they had never heard about had been working tirelessly in a mine for the past 16 years. He didn't have much time to enjoy his freedom before a new deal had been placed in front of him, and he was sure that this deal wouldn't be any cheaper than the last. Of course, Daniel could always refuse to pay for information regarding this unknown uncle, but the single thought of doing so made him imagine the disappointment his father would feel for him. A man that had always told him that family was more important than anything else. "How much?" he said dispiritedly. A sinister smile grew on the old man's face. "Your father had promised to me 10 gold coins for the information, but I have kept it for 16 years. How do you feel about double?" Daniel's fists tightened so hard that, if he hadn't reached the second rank of martial cultivation, his fingernails would have easily pierced his skin. "I don't have that kind of money," said Daniel through his gritting teeth. "It's all right, you know I like to help," said the old man as his lips opened into a wide smile, showing 2 rows of slightly yellow teeth. "How about I give you 1 year, and you pay 30 gold coins? Primary quest updated. Freedom for all. Description: eradicate slavery from the world. Scanned objective set. Find the location of your uncle and free him. Optional: kill the hotel owner. Reward: karma plus 750, plus 1,500. Failure: karma minus 2,000 time limit. Your uncle will die in 23 years, 9 months, and 11 days. After taking a moment to analyze the new quest objective, Daniel nodded his head and accepted the deal. There was no need to refuse the old man's proposition, as making money wasn't as hard to him anymore. "I accept, but I want the information now," said Daniel firmly while advancing his condition. "Very well, but this time we'll make a legal contract. I don't want to wait 20 more years for another brat to come looking for this useless information," added the old man. After signing the document and leaving a blood print on it, a letter was given to Daniel before he was escorted out of the building. Once outside of the building, Daniel started examining the content of the letter. Inside it was a sheet of paper on which a few informations were written. T.N. Heel, 31 years old, sold to the Silver Peak Mining Company when he was 15 for the price of 12 gold, 50 silver coins. Daniel put the sheet of paper back into the envelope and started walking back towards his home in the slums. Chapter 14, Moving O Slums. 21:15, when Daniel managed to get back to his house in the slums, he noticed the dim lights coming from the windows and realized that Maya and Rayla had come back. Inside the house, a couple of beautiful girls were sitting at a table, above which various dishes had been placed. "About time. We were starting to think that you wouldn't be back tonight," said Rayla. "Welcome back," said Maya while giggling shyly. After she had gotten used to Rayla's personality in the evening that they had spent together, they quickly became friends. "I like how you packed," said Rayla teasingly while indicating at their untouched belongings. Daniel smiled, took his cape off, and dropped his bag on the ground. "Sorry, I had something to settle first." He then took his seat on the table. "Did you find a house?" he asked of the two girls. "Oh yes," said Rayla excitedly. She then started listing all the houses they had seen, their prices, and the locations. In the beginning, Daniel wanted a house with at least 3 rooms, but after learning about his uncle's situation, he decided to go for a larger house. Daniel had slowly started to become aware that the freedom for all quest would not only require him to free people along the road, but also take responsibility for them. For example, he had already set Maya free, but because of her belonging to a family accused of treason, she would either be killed by bounty hunters or be once again enslaved if he decided to let her go on her way. Provided that he knew that he wouldn't be able to take every person the system will make him help in, he wanted to at least have a chance to, if necessary. One thing was for certain, the Karmic System wasn't free. When listening to his sister's description about the houses they had seen, Daniel noticed the emphasis she had put when describing 2 of the few houses she had listed. The first one was a medium-sized house with 3 bedrooms and a small yard in the front. It was situated near her friends' houses and was next to various commercial roads. Its size was big enough for the 3 of them to live in, and the price was fairly affordable. The second was a 4-story building in which an old man lived. The building used to be a small hotel, but after a few financial problems, had been forced to cease activity. The old man had purchased the building and lived in it ever since, renting the rooms to students. The reason why Rayla had put emphasis on describing this location was because it was situated close to her school, and the nearby buildings were the school's dorms. "What do you think, Maya?" Daniel said while looking at the girl. He felt slightly odd about the idea of making Maya stay in their house. After all, she didn't know them that well. Furthermore, Maya had been a slave, and he didn't want to give her the impression that she wasn't completely free. So when he heard about the building with separated rooms, he became fairly excited. Rayla interjected, "Right away, if we take 3 rooms here, going to school would be much easier, and all of us would have their own privacy." Of course, Rayla had also noticed her brother's reaction when she mentioned the 4-story building, so she pressed on it. Before Maya could say anything, Daniel said, "Sounds nice. Wouldn't have to sleep in a room filled with the poisonous clouds made by your cook." "Ouch. SSSH. A underhanded kick on the shin bone interrupted his sentence. "Fine. Separate rooms then." He feigned indignation while rapidly rubbing his unhurt shin. Daniel genuinely wanted to hear Mi's opinion, but also thought that if Rayla had interjected on the subject, she must have had a good reason, and he was right. When Rayla and Maya had spent time together alone, she had noticed that the time spent on the run, not to talk about her being enslaved, had left a deep scar on her. She didn't trust other people easily, but she also wasn't the kind of person who would advance requests if other people's money was being used. That's why whenever Rayla asked for Mi's opinion when looking at a house, she would simply mention some good qualities about the house, but would never give her true opinion. After dropping the conversation, the 3 started to eat dinner. Half an hour later, the 2 girls started chatting amongst themselves while Daniel sat quietly on a corner. "You girls should go to bed early tonight. We'll move tomorrow. Maya, you can sleep on Rayla's bed. Shall sleep on mine. Where will you sleep?" Rayla asked. Daniel looked at her and responded, "I have something to do. I don't know how long it will take. Don't worry about me." "Fine, but don't you dare act tired tomorrow just to make us hold the bags." As the girls stood up and prepared to go to bed, "Maya, can I talk to you for a moment?" Daniel said. Maya walked towards him, and as she was about to talk, "You've told me your father was a powerful martial cultivator. He must have had plenty of knowledge about it, right?" Maya had been taken by surprise, but she composed herself right away and nodded her head firmly. "Have you ever learned martial cultivation from your father?" he asked with eyes filled with hope. Mi's eyes flashed with a bit of sadness when she remembered about the time she spent with her father. After a few moments, she looked at Daniel and responded with a simple yes. Daniel didn't want to beat around the bush, so he simply asked, "Have you ever heard about a perfect state between stages?" A surprised look appeared on Mi's face once more. She had in fact heard about the perfect state from her father. The perfect state was a second stratum of refining of the body through ki. A person at the perfect state would have a much deeper foundation, perfecting their bodies to a point where their battle prowess was near that of a next stage practitioner. The idea of perfecting their bodies interested many practitioners of old, but unfortunately, it wasn't easy to reach. The problem wasn't talent or resources. The problem was time. In fact, refining one's body to the perfect stage would take years. Years which practitioners weren't willing to spend stuck at the same stage. After tens of thousands of years, most records have been lost about this subject, and as reaching perfection of the stage turned into a simple matter of increasing one's battle prowess, the practice had lost people's interest and had been slowly given up. Maya explained everything she had heard from her father about this subject to Daniel, and then she went to bed. What's the point of reaching the perfect state if all it does is increasing my battle prowess? And why would the system reward me with so many points for reaching it? A series of questions rushed into Daniel's mind as he quietly sat in a corner of the living room. No point thinking about it now, he muttered. One thing that Daniel had learned from Maya was that the perfect state is an optional substage in between major stages, so there's no need for him to worry about it now, since he was still at the peak of the second rank. What left Daniel slightly excited was that, when thinking at the timeline that the quest had given him to reach the perfect stage, he had realized that the fact that the system had only given him an additional month for reaching it meant that it wouldn't take him a full month to reach it if he wanted to. In a good mood, Daniel took a few rank 1 beast cores from his bag and started to attempt a breakthrough to the 3rd rank. His intention was to keep cultivating using beast cores for the whole night. Sitting quietly with 2 rank 1 beast cores on his hands, he started to absorb them and direct the raging beast essence towards his bones. After a full hour, Daniel finally managed to break through the early vasodilation substage. 2 more hours later, he had reached the mid-rank 3, and when the first lights of the morning started to shine through the windows, 5 hours later, he was at the late 3rd rank. The difference between Daniel's body before and now was abysmal. The more he cultivated, the easier it was for him to produce ki and to make it circulate through his body. Daniel checked the content of his bag and noticed that he had consumed 2/3 of his beast cores, while the 8 straight hours of cultivation had made his karma points drop from 656 to 416. After making the calculation, Daniel had realized that cultivating with beast cores consumed 10 times the amount of karma points compared to cultivating without. Naturally, Daniel had also felt the difference between the 2 types of cultivation. Cultivating with beast cores forced the beast essence inside one's body in an aggressive manner. One required to direct the foreign form of power and use it to refine their bodies. The difference between the two was like the difference between tempering your body underneath a gentle stream of water and a raging waterfall. The latter would be much more efficient, but also more dangerous, while the former was safe but far slower. Daniel didn't feel any sort of weakness from spending all night cultivating. In fact, whenever he advanced, he would feel his body become stronger than ever. While he waited for Maya and his sister to wake up, he decided to prepare breakfast. As the first street noises started to reach the insides of Daniel's house, the 2 sleepy-looking girls came out of the room while still wearing pajamas. The 2 looked sleepy for 2 different reasons. Rayla had slept peacefully, while Maya had barely managed to close her eyes for the entire night. After breakfast, the 3 went to a nearby bathhouse to clean themselves. They then headed back home and started packing their belongings. Commoners section, 11:58 a.m., small group of 3 was walking on the busy streets. 2 of them were beautiful girls, while the 3rd was an unfortunate young man, which currently had a bag 2 times his size strapped on his back. Are you sure it's this way? Asked Daniel. She turned towards him and, Are you asking me if Eve forgotten where my school is? She asked back, slightly irritated. Daniel, startled by her irritated tone, said, All right, calm down. It's just that there's a lot of people around giving you two weird looks. Daniel had learned his sister's weak point. Whenever he made her angry, he would simply need to throw a subtle compliment to her looks, and then she would usually calm down. He was right, as Rayla looked at him sideways, her eyelids so thin that they almost looked like they were closed. And then she slowly calmed down. I think they are staring at you. And how weird you look with that huge bag behind your back, she scoffed. Why did you even insisted to take all the stuff yourself? Are you trying to steal a mule's job? Ah, Beifun. If you used half of the effort you spend on thinking of ways to mock me into your sense of direction, I wouldn't have to come pick you up from school so damn often. Or at least we would have arrived already. Daniel retorted sarcastically. Fine, we are here, she said while throwing her hands in the air. What stood in front of the three was a large 4-story building. The building had a rectangular shape, which expanded in width more than in height. Its white stone walls were so smooth that they looked like they had been carved from one immense boulder. Long balconies could be seen connecting every room from outside of the building, and decorating the frontal wall were hundreds of rosewood boards placed vertically, diagonally, and horizontally. The number of windows visible from the outside suggested that either each room had more than one window, or the former hotel contained a large amount of rooms. Above the 4th floor, a gable roof extended through the entire building, covering it completely. At the ground floor, an impressive-looking double door stood above a short set of wooden steps. Chapter 15, The Building Owner Woe. An impressive building, said Daniel with a surprised look on his face. As Rayla was about to boast about her capabilities, the double door swung open. From behind it, a serious-looking old man came out. This old man had a head full of gray, thick brush-back hair and a well-kept full beard. The old signs of age on the man's face betrayed his real age, which approached his mid-70s, but made him look like a man in his mid-50s. His back, differently from most people of his age, was straight as an arrow. The look on his face was serious and dignified, almost as if he didn't appreciate the intrusion. His eyes were sharp as swords and of a deep, indistinguishable color, with shades spanning from light gray and dark green. Ironically, the old man's eye color betrayed his age more than his skin or hair color did. Every single detail on this old man made the three guess that, when he was younger, he had been an extremely handsome man. Rayla was the first to talk. Good afternoon, sir. We are back, she said with a smile on her face. The old man didn't respond. He simply looked at the two girls, and then his eyes stopped on Daniel. His sharp eyes narrowed slightly, and after a few moments, he finally said, Very well. Follow me to pick your rooms. He then turned around and moved back inside the building. The three followed him, and as they entered, Maya and Rayla kept an eye on Daniel's reaction. And for a good reason. As expected, Daniel's jaw dropped when he saw the insides of the building. The place didn't look like a dismissed hotel. It actually looked like a fully working one. The entire hall was enlightened by the large chandeliers, with lights of various sizes that flooded the room with a bright sunlight of magic nature. Various sets of refined yet comfortable couches surrounded just as many coffee tables, from which small planters had been carved in the middle. These carved planters contained clean dirt partially covered in grass and a few different types of flowers. Each table had different combinations of unique-looking flowers, which made every booth different from the other. Before heading straight to the rooms, the old man patiently showed the three to the lobby, the kitchen, the training grounds, cultivation rooms, and utilities. After the three picked their rooms, the old man left the three without saying a word. Rayla, did you pay him already? Asked Daniel. Rayla looked at him and responded, Not yet. Want to do the honors? She said before throwing the small bag of coins back at Daniel when we came the first time. He said that it was 1 gold coin each per month, she added before going back into unpacking her belongings. The low prices of their rooms had slightly surprised Daniel. Provided that this was the commoner section of the working district, the place was oddly refined. Daniel had guessed that the building hadn't been in this condition before the old man bought it. After unpacking his belongings, Daniel left his room and started looking for the old man. A little more than 3 hours had passed since the old man had left the three alone, and Daniel had decided to look for the old man in the lobby, as that was the most likely place to find him. When he reached the lobby, what he found wasn't the old man, but a group of young-looking people. Each one of these young men and women looked to be in their early 20s, and all of their attires looked refined, yet different. They were sitting on the couches and chatting. Some of them had great swords strapped on their back, while others had sheathed long swords, rapiers, and daggers hanging from their belts. A couple of girls who were wearing the same outfit were holding two heavy-looking folding fans. One held hers closed within her folded arms, while the other kept it opened and used it to fan her face slowly, while some of the people in the group were even unarmed. The dynamics of this group of young men were unclear to Daniel. Some of these people were cordially talking to each other. Some looked to be on the verge of starting a fight, and there were even some men pestering young women and vice versa. One thing that all of these people had in common was a clear pride that grew a few meters taller than their heads. Daniel curiously looked at the top of their heads and noticed that most of them had a neutral or slightly negative karma. He had guessed that these young men and women were the proud children of powerful organizations, and by being nurtured by their groups, they didn't have enough chances to do anything that would grant them a good karma. We've been here for half an hour already. Exactly, just half an hour. Why can't you just be patient? He was fired. Why is he acting so high and mighty anyway? Idiot. Why don't you ask him in person? Well, drag your decapitated body back to that shithole you call a school. Hee, how dare you? You bitch. And we could be together if you accepted my sect's marriage proposal. And why the hell should his family mix with your sect? We've known each other much longer. You should accept ours instead. A loud buzz of conversation was filling the lobby. As Daniel was still wondering what this loud group of people might be doing here, he was noticed by a young man at the edge of the crowd. This young man had a clean buzz cut and a faint scar which appeared parallel to his left eyebrow. His clothes were of a simple kind, but of a high quality. On his chest, he wore a thin leather armor, marked with the beautiful carving of a tree on the right side of his chest. Underneath the leather armor, he wore a long-sleeved black shirt, and a pair of vambraces covered his forearms. His long pants were tucked inside of a pair of boots of the same color as the leather armor. The young man had fairly good looks and was one of the few who wasn't carrying a weapon. Hey, there's someone there. The entire crowd quieted and looked towards Daniel. The first to talk was one of the two women that were holding a folding fan. Unfolding her arms, she pointed her closed folding fan towards Daniel's servant. Come here, she said in a domineering tone. Daniel's face didn't change in the slightest. He simply turned around and started heading back from the way he came, when, hey, how dare you ignore me? She shouted angrily. There she goes again. We should stop, shouldn't we? Nah, if she want to waste her chances because of her bad attitude, so be it. The buzz of conversation started once more as the young woman got up from her seat and started heading towards Daniel with a face filled with anger. It didn't take long for the girl to approach Daniel, and after lifting her hand, she swung it down towards Daniel's face. What the girl didn't expect, unfortunately, was that this servant would avoid the slap, making her miss completely. Ha ha! Look, it's the legendary technique of the folding crane school. Fly swatting slap. Ha ha ha, said a young woman in the crowd, whose group apparently didn't have a good relationship with the folding crane school. Some of the group of young men and women laughed at the girl's derisive remark, while others had an embarrassed look on their faces. The faces of the two girls holding folding fans turned as red as apples. How dare you embarrass me in front of everybody? They'll cut your head for this, said the girl that had previously missed Daniel. She then unfolded her fan, and as she was about to attack Daniel with it, the young man in leather armor held her by her wrist and said, all right. Calm down. Do I need to remind you where we are? The girl was truly enraged, and being stopped by someone when trying to regain face for her school had made her even angrier. Let go of me, she shouted while trying time after time to free herself from the man's hand. But that was all for naught. The young man was an experienced martial artist, and all the young woman's hits had been easily parried or evaded. After no less than 2 minutes of failed attempts, the young woman finally calmed down. Noticing the changes in the young woman's temperament, the young man in leather armor let go of her hand. The girl then threw a deadly glare at Daniel and walked back towards her group, sitting back to her place. The young man in leather armor turned towards Daniel and said, "Forgive her for her rude words. Can you tell us where your master is?" Daniel didn't have a problem with talking with this group of people, but he didn't want to be treated as a servant. Considering the much more polite demeanor of the young man, Daniel decided to answer him. "I am no but a servant, and I don't know who you mean by master," said Daniel. The answer caught the young man and the rest of the group by surprise. "Aren't you a servant working for the old man who owns this building?" said a burly-looking young man with a greatsword strapped to his back. "I am not. I have just rented 3 rooms, and I'll be staying here with my sisters," responded Daniel. The faces of everyone present twisted in confusion. Various small groups formed as the buzz of conversation started once more. "Do you know where the old man is?" asked a tall and handsome young man with long hair, who had previously been pestered by various girls into accepting the marriage proposal advanced from their groups. "No idea," answered Daniel to the handsome-looking man. The man in the leather armor looked at the group and shrugged his shoulders while saying, "Let's just wait." "There is no need," said a powerful voice resounded through the entire lobby. Its origin couldn't be distinguished, but all people present felt a shiver run down their spine when they heard it. Daniel had recognized it as the voice of the old man, owner of the building. "Sir, our groups have heard that you have taken in disciples recently. We were wondering if you would consider us," said the handsome young man while bowing his head. There was no answer. Minutes passed one after the other, and as the handsome-looking young man was about to talk again, the one with the leather armor stopped him. After the handsome-looking young man noticed who had stopped him, he quietly turned towards the young man wearing the leather armor. One could guess that the two clearly had a good relationship. The young man in leather armor looked at the handsome-looking man and said, "I don't think he has taken in any disciples. All of our forces received the news that 3 teenagers had entered the building about 3 hours ago. My guess is that this little guy and his sisters are the 3 teenagers, and that they are here as, well, new tenants." The handsome young man's eyes opened wide. "You were telling me that the previous master at arms of Careless, after retirement, simply bought a building in the commoners section and is looking for tenants?" he asked with clear disbelief in his tone. Every other conversation stopped as everyone within the large group looked at the pair of young men, their eyes growing bigger by the second. Disbelief plastered on their faces. A very few members of the group weren't as surprised, as they had had the same guess as the young man in leather armor. After a few minutes, the looks of surprise turned into pensive expressions, and as most of them seemed to be in the midst of taking a decision within their minds, the young man in leather armor said in a low voice, "Sir, is it possible to rent a room?"